good afternoon. Today we have with us Dr. Soumitra Pathare, Director of Center for Mental Health Law and Policy. Thank you for talking to me, Dr. Soumitra.
Thank you. Hi, I'm pleased to be here.
My first question to you is, how do you perceive the current landscape of mental health apps in terms of their popularity and usage?
I mean, there's a lot of mental health apps available, not just in India but internationally too. While I haven't seen the usage data as such, I did see some papers, and clearly the usage data seems to be going up. The bigger challenges around it remain, and the challenges are not to do so much with accessibility, which is a challenge, that they're not accessible to everyone. They're only accessible to a certain section of the population because internet and all of those issues. The bigger challenge that I see is how a lot of these apps are being launched without any kind of data or evidence base to demonstrate, first of all, A, that they are safe, and B, that they are effective. There's a presumption somehow that if these apps are launched and are in the market, then they must do some good. And there's very little evidence to actually show that. So, that's the biggest concern I have with apps, and especially apps which also charge a fee for use when they don't have that data.
So, from your perspective, do mental health apps on smartphones serve as a valuable asset or would be a potential liability for users?
Mental health apps, in theory, mental health apps on a mobile phone is an asset, is likely to be an asset. Let me put it that way: is likely to be an asset because of the chances of being able to take it to scale. However, my concern is that currently, the way things are progressing, they pose significant risks and dangers to the general public because we need to be looking at them. If they are supposed to be therapy apps, if they're supposed to be helping people who have a health problem, then they need to be properly evidence-based. Today it's almost become like anyone can launch a mental health app and just put it out in the market. Now, would you allow that if somebody were to launch medicines in the same sort of way? You wouldn't allow that, isn't it? You would insist medicines and devices, for example, even stents and all, undergo proper safety and efficacy trials. And we should be looking at apps also as medical devices. And they need to produce that kind of data and be regulated in the same way that medical devices are regulated, like, for example, stents are regulated. So I think it's an important thing that needs to be brought into the regulatory landscape. At the moment, apps could range from being very effective or useful to being hopeless and not useful at all, and or even worse, being harmful. And we have no way of knowing that. A consumer has no way of knowing whether this mental health app is going to be useful and safe, or is it going to be harmful and useless. There's just no way of knowing that.
So would the apps have this similar empathy? Like, for instance, there's a patient, they would not have the similar empathy as compared to a physical person being there to listen to them. So wouldn't it hamper the kind of therapy that it would give?
That is a different sort of a question, really. Most of the apps really are trying to follow what is called as manualized therapy. A lot of the therapy that you talk about it's not, that's the other issue with therapy in general in India, is that people think therapy means having a chat with someone and offering some grandmotherly advice on it. That's not what therapy and psychological counseling is. It has certain principles. There's a theory behind it, and there's usually a manual which will go with it. How are you supposed to do it? What are the steps to take and all. So most of the apps will follow that kind of therapy, therapy logic. However, you're right. Some of them, that a large number of the apps which are out there don't, they tend to blur this distinction, which is what I find it for problematic. From a regulatory perspective, they don't want to be seen as providing treatment. Okay, so they say, oh, they'll call it some weird names like this is a wellness thing or something of that sort. So if you look at their fine print and literature, they will say, oh, this is not for treatment of depression. If you have depression, please consult a psychiatrist. But when they do their advertising, they will subtly sell it as if it is a treatment for depression without saying so. And that is really problematic, because on one hand you're claiming it is not a treatment because you don't want to fall into a medical device category, but on the other hand you're marketing it as if it is treatment. So the whole and there's a problem with this, that it gives the entire sector a bad name, because a lot of the apps are out there in the market just trying to get revenue and be seen as a startup, which can then generate and create hype and generate a lot of revenue, as well as then probably attract funding into their companies. So that's a concern I have. But I don't think that this idea that, oh, if there is no human behind it will make a huge difference. I don't think that's always true. There will be therapies which are manualized, and those can certainly be done through an online app. That shouldn't be a problem.
So how do these apps contribute to the overall mental health ecosystem, especially considering factors like accessibility and affordability?
Again, there's no easy answer to this. But in general, if you had to generalize, then yes, these apps can contribute to increasing accessibility and affordability. In fact, that has been the attraction of using digital mental health interventions. Why people are interested in digital mental health interventions is because of the scalability, the improving accessibility, as well as reducing costs. But at the moment, it has become a little bit of a kind of cottage industry with no regulation, no evidence. And so we really don't know what these apps are, who's producing them, do they have any evidence? What kind of, for just give you one example, what kind of privacy rules do they follow? We don't know that. Do they even follow any privacy rules? Is your data likely to be at risk? And I'm not talking hypothetical scenarios, because this kind of stuff has happened in other countries, where people's personal data, therapy data has got leaked out of mental health apps in other countries. So this is not just a hypothetical example. So privacy is something we don't know. We don't know safety. We don't know efficacy. All of that stuff. So yes, in theory, it is something that we should be putting in place and really researching it and putting it out there for people to use. But my worry is that the way it is being done just now will actually end up giving digital mental health and mental health apps a bad name, and then everyone loses interest in them or starts thinking they're just useless pieces of tools for treatment, which will be a shame, because there is a lot of potential and I hope that is there. But at the moment, the hype has gone far ahead of reality.
So as you mentioned that these apps can put a potential risk to the data of the users, is there any
Yes.
way that the users can protect their information?
How will you know? Because different apps have followed different policies. Without knowing those policies, how can a user protect it? I think the if you're going to be using any app, my advice would be, first of all, see if that app has evidence for its effectiveness. See if the app is, what is the app for? What is it offering you? Check what their privacy policies are. Check what their data safety norms are. I mean, because there is no regulation of this space, every user is forced to do this themselves. If you had a regulator who was looking at it and ensuring that all apps were following these principles or whatever the regulator set as standards, then you wouldn't have to. But given that there is no regulation and it is a cottage industry, if I can call it, every user of every app will have to ensure that they've seen all of this and are and satisfied themselves what the risks are involved in using that app.
So what potential risks if, say, for example, a user uses it a lot and the dependency increases on these apps of a user, what are the potential risks that can come from that?
You mean dependency? I didn't get your question. What is the
If the user is using it continuously for their
yeah,
mental health problems,
yes.
what are the potential risks and liabilities that could occur in the user's life?
Well, like I said, the first risk is that it doesn't help at all, which is which means you wasted your money and time doing something that is ineffective. That's the first and most important risk, which people don't see as a risk. They just think, oh, that was just something I did. But it's the biggest risk, because imagine it doesn't work for you and your condition is getting worse or remaining the same, you're losing valuable time. The second risk, obviously, is that the app does or gets you to do certain things which actually are then harmful to you or create harm for you, or gives you some advice which and you follow the advice and results in negative effects for you. Now that clearly would be harm in that sort. So there is that kind of active harm that can also happen. The third bit is, as I said, about the privacy stuff. Let's imagine that there is very personal data about you, which now the app has got, and the fact that you have a mental health condition. And if that data is not private, then it could have implications if it came out in the public space, given the fact that mental health is still a very stigmatized condition. And so that there is a risk that that data or that information coming out in the public domain could cause some kind of harm to you. So I'm just giving you very broad ideas of what kind of harm can happen.
So, in your experience, how have you seen the effectiveness of the mental health apps in the improvement of mental well-being of the users?
I wouldn't know that, no, because the people who use apps don't actually go and see a clinician. So, in a sense, in fact, they're using the app because they don't want to see a clinician. So that's and also, I think my personal view or anybody's personal view really should not be the way we go about it. I think what we need, as I said, what we need is more evidence, more data, and more regulation. I mean, those are the three ways to answer your question. What is the evidence? Do apps and there are papers people have done looking at various apps, say, available on the US market, to see how many of them actually had evidence for efficacy and safety. So I think we should be looking at the evidence, we should be looking at the data, and we should be looking at whether they are actually beneficial to users. Now, the problem is most apps will not cooperate with anyone who's trying to do that, because it's almost like, oh, but what if you find that my app does not actually help anybody? And people don't really want to know that. So it's become a bit like we don't want to know whether it works or not. We can just go ahead and make a claim that it works without actually having the data for it.
So, do these apps help a person personally, as in it is personalized, or these are one size fits all solution kind of a thing?
They're very different, no? Like different apps do differently, and many of the apps will say that it's personalized, but is it really personalized is something that we don't know. So what the apps claim, that's why I said what apps claim to do versus what they really do is a complete unknown. We don't. There's no way of going out there and saying that app all apps do the same thing. There's no standardization, for example. So if a app says that we provide personalized data, how is that decided? There's no standardization of that claim. And I think, again, it just points out to the lack of regulation in this space. And somehow we do need to get our regulators to actually get into regulating it as a medical device. And if you're going to sell it as a medical device, then it better be regulated like a medical device.
So, in your opinion, do mental health apps complement the traditional therapeutic approaches or challenges them?
they could potentially complement them. I don't think there's going to be a challenge because uh, the reality of it is that in our country, almost 70 to 80% of people who need mental health care do not get the mental health care. So you're talking of a scarcity situation. You're not talking of where everyone's getting treatment, and so then there's a challenge. So mental health apps are going to obviously can potentially increase the accessibility. That's not going to be an issue at all. And they could also be seen as complementary. They can provide. So I don't see them as challenging face to face or what is called as conventional treatment. I just see them as complementary. But I'm extremely worried that while there's a lot of positives that can happen with apps, the way we are doing it is running risks which are not necessary at all, and which are especially putting people who are vulnerable because of their mental health condition at risk to harm, and that is a very scary thought for me.
So, as we come to the end, what trends do you foresee in the development and utilization of these mental health apps in the future?
The trend that I don't know if I can foresee as much as hope that it will happen is that we get more structured evidence base for these apps, so that the newer apps which are coming in actually make the effort and put in the time and effort and the resources to develop evidence for their effectiveness and safety. Hopefully, we will start seeing more interest from the regulators in trying to regulate and standardize these apps, as well as the claims that these apps are making. Which, like we do with medicines or with food and all of that, so that you have some standards which are then followed. And I think the apps provide a potential, a huge potential for improving access to mental health care in our country. So that's the biggest positive which needs to be kept in mind. So that's going to go ahead. Apps are here to stay. We are better off actually saying how can we use them usefully to improve access to people who do need them with mental health problems.